Overnight, the cost of a single life-saving pill skyrocketed from $13.50 to $750. This was not the result of a sudden global shortage, a complex supply chain collapse, or a breakthrough in medical research that required recouping billions in investment. It was a calculated, perfectly legal maneuver executed by a single company that recognized a glaring vulnerability in the American healthcare apparatus. For patients relying on this medication to survive deadly parasitic infections, the 5,000% price hike was a death sentence delivered by spreadsheet. This is the reality of a pharmaceutical landscape where corporate profit routinely supersedes human life, a system designed with blind spots so massive that a hedge fund manager could exploit them to hold vulnerable populations hostage. The scandal surrounding Martin Shkreli and the drug Daraprim is often remembered as a tale of individual villainy, but focusing solely on the infamous Pharma Bro misses the terrifying truth. The system did not break when he acquired that drug. The system functioned exactly as it was built to function. In August 2015, a newly formed company named Turing Pharmaceuticals purchased the exclusive rights to Daraprim for $55 million. At the helm was Martin Shkreli, a former hedge fund manager with a history of short-selling biotechnology stocks and a keen eye for undervalued assets. Daraprim was not a new, innovative therapy. It was the brand name for pyrimethamine, a medication first synthesized in 1952. For over 6 decades, it had been the gold standard treatment for toxoplasmosis, a severe parasitic infection that attacks the brain, eyes, and other organs. While a healthy immune system can usually keep the parasite in check, toxoplasmosis is devastating and often fatal for the immunocompromised. This includes infants born to infected mothers, individuals undergoing cancer chemotherapy, and, most prominently, AIDS patients. Turing Pharmaceuticals did not alter the drug formula. They did not improve its efficacy or reduce its side effects. Their sole innovation was financial. Immediately upon closing the acquisition, the company implemented the catastrophic price hike, transforming an affordable, 63-year-old staple of infectious disease treatment into a luxury commodity. To understand how such an astronomical increase was even possible, one must examine the specific mechanics of the United States drug pricing market. Daraprim was what the industry calls off-patent. Patents grant pharmaceutical companies a temporary monopoly to recoup research and development costs, typically lasting 20 years. Once a patent expires, the market is theoretically supposed to open up to generic competitors, driving prices down through free market competition. Daraprim had been off-patent for decades. By all conventional economic logic, it should have been cheap and widely available from multiple manufacturers. Yet, Turing Pharmaceuticals found themselves as the sole supplier in the United States. The patient population for toxoplasmosis, while highly vulnerable, is relatively small. For years, the previous owners of the drug had kept the price low enough that it simply was not lucrative for generic manufacturers to invest the time and money required to enter the market. Shkreli recognized this lack of competition not as a market equilibrium, but as an unprotected vault. But merely raising the price of an unpatented drug is a risky gamble, as exorbitant profit margins act as a beacon, practically begging generic competitors to flood the market and undercut the new price. To prevent this, Turing Pharmaceuticals deployed a ruthless, highly effective mechanism known as a closed distribution system. Typically, drugs are distributed through wide networks of wholesalers and pharmacies. A closed system restricts the sale of the drug to a single specialty pharmacy. On paper, pharmaceutical companies argue these systems are necessary to monitor safety and handle complex medications. In reality, they are frequently weaponized as impenetrable barriers to entry. According to antitrust investigations, by locking Daraprim behind a closed distribution network, Turing made it physically impossible for rival generic manufacturers to purchase the thousands of pill samples required by the FDA to conduct bioequivalence testing. If a generic company cannot prove their version is identical to the original, they cannot get FDA approval. The monopoly was synthetically and legally sealed. Even if a competitor managed to bypass the distribution blockade and acquire the necessary samples, they faced another formidable systemic hurdle within the regulatory body itself. At the time of the Daraprim acquisition, the Food and Drug Administration was grappling with a massive backlog of generic drug applications. The median approval time for a new generic medication was stretching past 42 months. Turing Pharmaceuticals knew that even in a worst-case scenario where a competitor successfully submitted an application, Turing would enjoy nearly 4 years of unchecked monopolistic pricing power before a cheaper alternative could reach the pharmacy shelves. This regulatory bottleneck essentially functioned as a state-sponsored guarantee of continuous revenue. The system, designed to ensure drug safety and efficacy, was inadvertently protecting the very price gouging it was meant to prevent. How could a regulatory framework intended to protect public health become the primary shield for corporate extortion? The resulting public outcry was swift and unprecedented, dominating news cycles and drawing bipartisan condemnation from political leaders. Medical associations published frantic warnings, and patients shared harrowing stories of sudden, unpayable medical bills. Yet, amidst the intense media scrutiny, a crucial element of the narrative was being obscured. The focus remained laser-targeted on the audacity of the price hike and the abrasive public persona of Martin Shkreli. But the true danger lay hidden in the quiet, structural realities of the healthcare market. The impending revelation was not about one man's lack of ethics, but about a vast, interconnected network of insurance providers, hospital administrators, and legal loopholes that actively sustained this predatory behavior. When confronted with the outrage, Turing Pharmaceuticals deployed a classic industry defense, claiming the massive profits were necessary to fund research and development for new, better toxoplasmosis treatments. This justification is a cornerstone of pharmaceutical public relations, often used to rationalize high costs for novel, life-saving therapies. However, applied to a drug synthesized during the Truman administration, the argument crumbled under scrutiny. Infectious disease experts and leading physicians publicly refuted the claim, noting that while better treatments are always welcome, Daraprim was already highly effective. The medical community was not clamoring for a new toxoplasmosis drug, but rather for access to the one that already existed. The research defense was a calculated smokescreen, a strategic talking point designed to exploit the public understanding of how medical innovation is funded, masking a pure rent-seeking operation. The shadow of that corporate tactic extends far beyond a single company. The Daraprim scandal was merely the most visible manifestation of a broader, systemic business model that had been quietly infecting the pharmaceutical industry for years. Other corporations had already pioneered the strategy of acquiring neglected, off-patent drugs and implementing massive price hikes. It was a Wall Street approach to public health, treating essential medicines as distressed assets to be squeezed for maximum shareholder value. They understood that in the American healthcare system, where the government is legally prohibited from negotiating drug prices for Medicare, the pricing power rests almost entirely with the manufacturer. If a company can secure a monopoly, even a temporary one, on an old drug, the system is fundamentally incapable of stopping them from charging whatever the market will bear. And when the market is composed of patients who will die without the medication, the demand is entirely inelastic. The consequences of this systemic vulnerability were immediate and devastating on the ground. Hospitals, which typically kept supplies of Daraprim on hand for emergency toxoplasmosis cases, suddenly found their budgets decimated by the new $750 per pill price tag. Many institutions were forced to stop stocking the drug entirely, leading to critical delays in treatment as doctors scrambled to secure emergency approvals from insurance companies or navigate complex patient assistance programs. For patients, the anxiety was paralyzing. Even those with robust health insurance faced skyrocketing copays, while the uninsured were effectively locked out of treatment. Furthermore, the burden of these inflated costs did not simply vanish. It was absorbed by the entire healthcare system, passed down to consumers in the form of higher insurance premiums and increased taxpayer burdens for government-funded health programs. As the crisis deepened, the theater of political accountability took center stage. The House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform subpoenaed Martin Shkreli, seeking answers for the blatant exploitation of American patients. The resulting congressional hearing became a spectacle of defiance. Advised by his legal counsel, Shkreli repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, refusing to answer questions about the pricing strategies or the closed distribution network. His dismissive demeanor during the proceedings became the defining image of pharmaceutical arrogance. Yet for all the righteous indignation displayed by lawmakers, the hearings exposed a paralyzing legislative impotence. Politicians could publicly berate the executive, but they could not point to a single law he had broken by raising the price of an unpatented drug. The exploitation was entirely legal under the existing framework. Further complicating the landscape is the opaque role of pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. These entities act as middlemen between pharmaceutical companies, health insurers, and pharmacies, negotiating rebates and determining which drugs are covered by insurance plans. While PBMs are ostensibly designed to control costs, their rebate-driven business model often creates perverse incentives. In some cases, a higher list price for a drug can actually result in larger rebates for the PBM, making them less likely to push back against sudden price hikes. While the Daraprim strategy relied primarily on monopoly control, the broader environment of secret negotiations and misaligned incentives within the PBM system creates a fertile ground for pricing abuses to go unchecked. The complexity of the supply chain serves as a shield, obscuring exactly who is profiting from the inflation of vital medications. The ultimate downfall of the executive provides a bitter irony to this saga. Martin Shkreli was eventually arrested, federally indicted, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, his conviction had absolutely nothing to do with the 5,000% price hike, the restriction of life-saving medicine, or the exploitation of AIDS patients. He was found guilty of securities fraud related to his previous hedge funds and a different pharmaceutical venture. The legal system successfully prosecuted him for defrauding wealthy investors, but it had no mechanism to punish him for holding hostage the lives of the sick and vulnerable. The drug pricing scheme itself remained untouched by his criminal conviction, a stark reminder of where the legal system priorities truly lie. The systemic vulnerability persisted, entirely unaddressed by his incarceration. It took years for the market to correct the anomaly that had been engineered. In 2020, the FDA finally approved the first generic version of pyrimethamine, breaking the monopoly and offering a more affordable alternative to patients. Additionally, the Federal Trade Commission and several state attorneys general launched a massive antitrust lawsuit, ultimately resulting in a lifetime ban from the pharmaceutical industry for Shkreli and a mandate to repay $64.6 million in ill-gotten profits. While these actions represented significant victories for consumer protection, they were reactive measures, taking years to implement while patients continued to suffer under exorbitant costs. The underlying structural weaknesses that allowed the crisis to occur required far more comprehensive legislative reform. The Martin Shkreli Daraprim scandal is not a closed chapter in the history of medical commerce. It is a permanent warning about the fragility of a healthcare system that relies on corporate goodwill rather than robust regulatory safeguards. It demonstrated with chilling clarity how easily a single actor can manipulate the mechanisms of supply and demand when the product is human survival. While the specific loopholes exploited during that time have faced increased scrutiny, the fundamental architecture of the American drug pricing market remains largely intact. As long as essential medicines can be treated purely as financial assets, and as long as the regulatory framework allows for the synthetic suppression of competition, the conditions for the next massive price hike are already in place. The system did not just fail the patients who needed Daraprim, it revealed itself to be a system functioning exactly as designed, prioritizing unchecked profit over the very lives it is meant to preserve.